Kalev, you put together a really fascinating report that I've just been reading, basically trying to deal with this issue of, big tech moderation, big tech censorship. And frankly, there aren't a lot of people trying to look at this, kind of how to deal with these questions in a deeper, more thoughtful way. So it was really a pleasure to have this come across my desk, frankly. Transparency is a central piece of your argument. You want to kind of, legislate transparency onto the social media companies. Tell us what you want to do.
Yeah, so, if we think about it, there's sort of widespread agreement. You look in, say, the aftermath of last week's Facebook whistleblower, one of the major themes that comes out of that is how little we know about these companies. That, what we know basically about how social media censorship work tends to come from these big leaks of information. And if you kind of step back, there's sort of widespread agreement that it's not tractable the way things are now. Like something needs to change. The question is what? And I think with social media, one of the challenges is, every day we hear about things getting taken down. But, take a simple example. Earlier this year, Twitter started deleting any tweet that mentioned the word Memphis in it. So all of a sudden, all these tweets are coming down, being told they violated Twitter's terms of service. And then, of course, the company obviously says, oops, sorry, it was an AI algorithm, run amok. We're sorry. Well, how exactly did that AI algorithm, come to see Memphis as being a bad term? We have no idea. How did these things get added? Was that a human being who typed in a keyword? Was that some machine learning algorithm that looks for things going viral and makes its own decisions? These are all these challenges that, is it humans moderation that's the problem? Is it machine moderation that is the problem? We really don't know who's being affected by these policies, what's being affected, what's being removed, and specifically how that, especially as more and more of our democracy is playing out through social platforms. I mean, it's where our government officials, you think about social media today, it's where our government officials, they talk to us. Yes, they have their own websites. Yes, they have other ways of getting things out there, but social media is how they talk to their constituents. To what degree is social media ensuring that certain content, for example, doesn't go viral? Maybe one congressperson puts out a new proposal and maybe social media platforms don't allow that to go viral. Another person puts out something and they push that out there to make that really go viral. To what degree are these silent hands sort of shaping our democratic debates? These are all these things that we really, really need answers to.
No, and I mean, some really great questions that you're raising here. I mean, there's a kind of illiberal ideology that has sort of, entered our common space, and especially in Silicon Valley amidst social media companies, this critical social justice ideology, which demands that basically only its perspective is the valid one. Anything that isn't its perspective is hurtful and harmful. So this is, I imagine a number of viewers are thinking to themselves, well, I know what the problem is. This is the problem, what I just described, for example, right? But you're saying that's actually, there's some deeper questions to be asked here.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love history, and anytime that I'm trying to understand, a question, I like to look back at how did we get where we are today. You think about social media content moderation today. We think of this, we think of content moderation, you think of the internet, you think of these big social platforms. But these are, if you step back, these are these same questions of freedom of speech that our nation has wrestled with since its founding for more than 2 centuries. What is acceptable speech? Should you be allowed to criticize your government? If you are allowed to, does that change during wartime? Should you not be allowed to criticize your government? For over 2 centuries, we've tried to wrestle with this question of what is harmful to talk about? What is allowable and what is harmful? And if you look back through our history, our country has tried it every possible way. We've tried it where the federal government tries to, come up with rules about what's allowed and not allowed. We try it with the states, with the cities, with private companies, with this, with that. We've tried it every possible scenario. And none of those has worked to the point that we said, wow, this is great. We have a solution that works. And, I think it was Justice Harlan that famously said, the question of how to define acceptable and not acceptable speech is, quote, an intractable problem. As a society, we've thrown up our hands. We've said, you know what, it's impossible to figure out what's allowable, what's not allowable. In a country that's really diverse with a large, with wildly different lived experiences and beliefs and so on and so forth, it's impossible for us all to come together and say, yes, these are the following things that are allowed. These are the following things that are not allowed. And anytime you have that situation where there's this rich diversity of viewpoint, you're never going to come to that consensus. So what we've said is, look, we can't figure this out. Let these private companies in Silicon Valley sort it out for us. And, that's really at the end of the day, what the problem is these companies, they're operating. If you kind of flip the coin and look at it from the company standpoint, how do they decide what's allowable or not allowable? The courts haven't been, other than a few exceptions, the courts in the US haven't really deemed much, disallowable. And so there's not really much guideline. They're sort of making it up as they go. And that's the real problem is we didn't stop and say, hey, social media companies, you can remove what you deem to be harmful, but that's the part that's missing. We could have said, but you have to put these out to a vote of the public. We didn't say that. We could have said, well, Congress has to review these at regular intervals and we have to publish these rules in Congress. We didn't do that. We just said, look, these private companies can do what they want. And most interestingly, if you look back in the history of censorship in the United States, there was a period where states had there was a lot of sort of local control of censorship. Section 230 specifically says the states have no ability to alter these rules to local needs. So I think that's really the root of all of this is the fact that we gave up as a society and told these private companies to figure it out in themselves. And we're not happy with the result. But that's because at the end of the day, you're never going to have, a set of private companies that are going to be able to come up with rules for all of us. We need this transparency to really be able to understand, what are these rules? And I come back to, if we look back a couple years ago, The Guardian had a leak of internal content moderation guidelines. This is called the original Facebook files, they called it. And what was fascinating about that is, for a long time, people said, look, the social media companies are censoring, but, they have to censor to help society, get rid of all that horrible stuff. But then when that came out, we saw that, look, anti-Semitism, that's allowed. Violence against women, that's allowed. All these different categories were explicitly with labels saying allowed under certain circumstances. And that provoked this huge discussion about, well, wait a second, why should these things be allowed? So society all of a sudden was able to realize that, all is not well here, that maybe we do need to have a little bit more visibility. So I think that's the thing is once you understand what's happening, then we can have these societal discussions about, do we agree with these or not?
Well, and so we definitely need to talk about Section 230. It's obviously kind of, pretty central to these questions. The thing is that I think it didn't occur to most people that this was even an issue, basically until around 2015, 2016, when there was also, social media companies started getting a lot of pressure to censor, including from Congress and so forth. And then, people started noticing, my feed is getting throttled. It seems like, I don't know for sure, but it looks like, looks like, this person got taken down. This is the canary in the coal mine now. We can expect more people to be. And it sort of seemed to accelerate dramatically from that time, basically from the time of the Trump candidacy and the beginnings of the Trump presidency.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, if you walk back and look at this, really these questions, since the dawn of the internet, the internet is an amorphous term, it refers to a lot of history. But if we kind of look at the early period, like the Usenet era, for those that are old enough to remember the Usenet, these same questions materialized there. There was this old term called the flame war, attacking people online, doxing, publishing people's information. And what's interesting is you look at these early days, there was a lot of public discussion about what should be allowable. If you're angry at someone, should you be allowed to publish their personal information on the web and tell people, publish their phone number, tell people, call them, go to their house. What today we would call doxing, that was around, way back when. We talk about like moderation, even in the earliest days, in Usenet, you had this issue. Take any issue like alt.politics.Middle East. That was a really particularly contentious board. So you had kind of this essentially what today we might think of as kind of like a mailing list. But again, like that got to be to a point where there was a moderated version of it. And for any given topic, you'd have kind of this sort of this Usenet group. Then you'd have other versions of it. You'd have moderated groups. Some cases you even had nice, quote unquote, nice versions where the rules were no profanity, no attacks, no nothing. And that's also, if you kind of look at that early era, that's how they kind of dealt with a lot of this issue of we all have different ideas about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So in the Usenet era, if you didn't like the rules in one group, you create another group. You could create as many of these, sort of groups as you wanted. The problem today with Twitter and Facebook and these social platforms is they're single universes. Take Twitter. If you want to have, say, a private debate in the corner about something, the problem is that debate, everyone in the world sees it. Everyone in the world's weighing in on it. So something that happens in one corner of the world, the entire world has to weigh in on it now.